Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 28 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Yes, we're well into the third canto. Today we are actually starting chapter 10. We're starting chapter 10. It's exciting. It's very exciting. So let's have a look here and see. Well, let's just have a look here and see what is this chapter. So, Canto 3, Chapter 10 is titled Divisions of the Creation. Alright, but first of all, though, we must chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyatyade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, devotees, so here we go. Let's have a look at the 10th chapter. What is the structure of the 10th chapter of the third canto? So, okay, there are 6 sections. There are 30 chapters altogether. So it's a little bit shorter chapter, and we've divided into 6 sections as follows. The first section is just the first 2 verses, verse 1 and verse 2, and we've titled this, Vidura asks Maitreya how Brahma created the bodies of the living entities. Verse 1 and verse 2, Vidura asks Maitreya how Brahma created the bodies of the living entities. So a very short section, just 2 verses. Then the second section is even shorter. It's just verse 3. And in verse 3, Sutta explains that this enlivened Maitreya. He became inspired when Vidura asked him like this. So Sutta explains that this enlivened Maitreya, and it's verse 3. The next section, third section, is from verse 4 to verse 9. And we've titled it, Maitreya briefly answers this question. So right from verse 4 to verse 9, Maitreya briefly answers this question. Then the fourth section is another very short section. It could not be any shorter because it's just one verse. It's verse 10, and we've titled this section, just verse 10, we've titled this, Vidura asks for a description of time. Oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds very interesting. Verse 10, Vidura asks for a description of time. That's the fourth section. Then the fifth section is verse 11 to verse 17. And we've titled that, Maitreya discusses time in terms of phases of creation. Verse 11 to verse 17, Maitreya discusses time in terms of phases of creation. Right, okay, and then finally the sixth section is from verse 18 to verse 30, and we've titled this, The Creations, plural, The Creations by Brahma. Verse 18 to verse 30, The Creations by Brahma. So there you go, devotees. That's the structure. That's the structure of chapter 10 of the third canto. The chapter's titled Divisions of the Creation. Right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's go to this first section, verse 1 and verse 2, which we've titled, Vidura asks Maitreya how Brahma created the bodies of the living entities. So it's just these two verses. We'll go straight through them with them. And in fact, only verse 2 has a purport, actually. So just straight through it. Verse 1. Sri Vidura said, O great sage, please let me know how Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Lord was there, Garbhadakshay Vishnu. He addressed Lord Brahma at some length. So then he disappeared. He withdrew from external vision. So Vidura is asking Maitreya, please let me know how Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Lord, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Verse 2. O greatly learned one, kindly eradicate all my doubts, and let me know of all that I've inquired from you, from the beginning to the end. Okay, so there's just a short purport, just a few lines, but let's go through it. So first of all, Prabhupada explains that Vidura asked these questions of Maitreya because he knew very well Maitreya was the right person to ask about such things. And Prabhupada makes sort of obvious point, but it's an extremely important point, that we have to be confident of the qualifications of the teacher. Otherwise you may end up asking important questions, but you can't get proper answers because you're asking the wrong person. A person who's not qualified to give the answers, the correct answers that you need. So therefore Prabhupada says we shouldn't approach a layman if we've got spiritual inquiries to make. So a very short purport. Prabhupada concludes it by saying, such inquiries, when replied to with imaginative answers by the teacher, are a program for wasting time. That's a classic. That's Prabhupada. It's a real classic Prabhupada statement. Completely to the point and very strong. That such inquiries, when replied to with speculative, imaginative answers by the so-called teacher, what are they good for? They're good for nothing except wasting your time. It's really so true. So now the second section, which is just verse 3, and we've called it Sutta Explains, that this enlivened Maitreya. Because Sutta Goswami, of course, is instructing the sages in Naimisharanya about the discussions between Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami. Yeah. So, in these, there are layers. There are layers in Srimad Bhagavatam. First layer is Shukadev Goswami instructs Parikshit, and Parikshit questions Shukadev. Second layer is that Sutta Goswami, who was there, relates all these things to the sages in Naimisharanya, headed by Shonaka. The next layer, which we're looking at here, is Vidura is questioning Maitreya. And that's actually what we're reading about specifically. Okay, let's get into it. Verse 3. Sutta Goswami said, O son of Bhrigu, the great sage Maitreya Muni, thus hearing from Vidura, felt very much enlivened. Everything was in his heart. And thus he began to reply to the questions, one after another. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport. It's another short purport. So Prabhupada explains, the phrase Sutta Uvacha, Sutta Goswami said, appears to indicate a break in the discourse between Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami. While Shukadev Goswami was speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, Sutta Goswami was only one member of a large audience. But Sutta Goswami was speaking to the sages of Naimisharanya, headed by the sage Shonaka, a descendant of Shukadev Goswami. Okay. This, however, does not make any substantial difference in the topics under discussion. So Sutta Goswami is explaining how Shukadev explained things to Maharaj Parikshit. And at this stage in the whole Bhagavatam, Shukadev Goswami explained in the case of this particular verse, Shukadev explained how Vidura had been questioning Maitreya Muni, and then how Maitreya answered his questions. Right, so on we go, devotees, to the third section from verse 4 to verse 9, which we've titled Maitreya briefly answers this question. This question is referring to the question in verse 1. Please let me know how Brahma, the grandfather of the planetary inhabitants, created the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the disappearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this question, enlivened, verse 3 says that this question enlivened Maitreya, Vidura's question. And now here we are in verse 4, that the greatly learned sage, the title of the section is Maitreya briefly answers this question, which we just read again 1 minute ago. So, and it's from verse 4 to verse 9, the brief answer to that question. So, but let us run through the verses. We got about 6 verses here. So let's start. Verse 4. The greatly learned sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, Brahma thus engaged himself in penances for 100 celestial years, as advised by the personality of Godhead, and applied himself in devotional service to the Lord. Verse 5. Thereafter Brahma saw that both the lotus on which he was situated and the water on which the lotus was growing were trembling due to a strong, violent wind. Verse 6. Long penance and transcendental knowledge of self-realization had matured Brahma in practical knowledge, and thus he drank the wind completely along with the water. Verse 7. Thereafter he saw that the lotus on which he was situated was spread throughout the universe, and he contemplated how to create all the planets which were previously merged in that very same lotus. Okay, verse 8. Thus engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Brahma entered into the well of the lotus, and as it spread all over the universe, he divided it into 3 divisions of worlds, and later into 14 divisions. Verse 9. Lord Brahma is the most exalted personality in the universe because of his causeless devotional service unto the Lord in mature transcendental knowledge. He therefore created all the 14 planetary divisions for inhabitation by the different types of living entities. So there you go, devotees. That's an answer to the first question, which was, how does Brahma create the bodies of the living entities from his own body and mind after the Lord disappeared from his vision? Okay, so here we go, devotees. Verse 4. The greatly learned sage Maitreya said, O Vidura, Brahma thus engaged himself in penances for 100 celestial years, as advised by the personality of Godhead, and applied himself in devotional service to the Lord. Okay, so that's the beginning of the answer. How did he get himself set up for doing what the question is about? So there's a very short purport here. What is it? It's 2 sentences. So the fact, Prabhupada says, the fact that Brahma engaged himself in service to the Lord, that Brahma engaged himself for the personality of Godhead Narayan means that he engaged himself in the service of the Lord. And that's the highest penance anyone can perform. And Prabhupada makes the point, interesting and very nice point. There is no retirement from such service, which is eternal and ever encouraging. Yes, sometimes devotees talk about, at least taking a break. And it's understandable to some degree if devotees have been doing some service and working really, really hard, then they may need to take a break and just let the body particularly relax a bit and build up strength again. But otherwise, devotees, for them, devotional service is their fun, it's their enjoyment, it's their nectar. It's not like on the material platform where your work is just, at least in many cases, it's something you just have to do because you have to make money in order to live. And what else can you do? You just got to do it. Devotional service for the devotees is their life, their inspiration, their nectar. Yes. Verse 5. Thereafter Brahma saw that both the lotus on which he was situated and the water on which the lotus was growing were trembling due to a strong, violent wind. Okay, so there's something of a purport here. Prabhupada makes the point, and it's a very important point of definition, that the material world is called illusory because it's a place of forgetfulness of service to the Lord. Therefore it's called illusory. Otherwise, devotees, we would just be absorbed in devotional service. But it's called illusory because it's a place of forgetfulness of service to the Lord. And Prabhupada makes the point that therefore, because it's a place of forgetfulness of service and in many ways it has an atmosphere which encourages forgetfulness of service, and rather, on the other hand, thinking that we'll get satisfaction for doing different material things for our sense gratification. Therefore, for the devotees, sometimes this world may be difficult. The awkward circumstances which crop up in this world may be difficult, and the devotee therefore may sometimes be disturbed as a result. Right, so here's an interesting way of looking at it, that there is a declaration of war between the two parties, the Maya party and the devotee party. And sometimes, if some devotee or devotees are weak, then they fall victim to the onslaught of the material energy, the onslaught of the powerful illusory energy. There's a mistake in my notes. Let me just change it. Okay. So sometimes weak devotees fall victim to the onslaught of the illusory energy. So, but the good news is Lord Brahma is sufficiently strong by the Lord's mercy. Yes. Causeless mercy of the Lord. So therefore he couldn't be victimized by Maya. He's too well situated to really be victimized and to fall down. Although Prabhupada says it did cause him anxiety when things were shaking, as is said here. The lotus, the water on which the lotus was growing, was trembling due to a strong, violent wind. Verse 6. Long penance and transcendental knowledge of self-realization had matured Brahma in practical knowledge, and thus he drank the wind completely along with the water. And again, there's something of a purport here, not long, but... Right, so Brahma's been struggling. Oh, Krishna. Brahma's struggle for existence is a personal example of the ongoing fight between the living entities here in this world and Maya, the illusory energy. And Prabhupada makes the point, of course, it's a famous point, even to the level of Lord Brahma, and what to speak of the more sort of normal devotees. From Brahma down, the living entities are struggling with the material nature. So, how are they doing that? How are they struggling? Not the devotees, but just the ordinary people. Because if you can try, if you want, to control the material energy by knowledge and science and even transcendental realization, you can try to control the material energy, although the thing is, the material energy works against our efforts. Yeah, the material energy is always challenging us in different ways. So Prabhupada says, it's just after the middle of the purport. In the very modern age, advanced material scientific knowledge and penance have played very wonderful roles in controlling the powers of the material energy. But as far as we're concerned, this control of the material energy is best done if you're a devotee, carrying out the Lord's order in the spirit of loving devotional service, transcendental service. Okay, on to verse 7. Thereafter he saw that the lotus on which he was situated was spread throughout the universe, and he contemplated how to create all the planets which were previously merged in that very same lotus. Okay, so let's have a look at Prabhupada's purport. So the thing is, to start off with, the seeds of all the planets were within the lotus. Yeah, the seeds of the planets from which the planets could develop. And yeah, so the fact is that both the material world itself and the living entities, they were already generated in seedling forms by the Lord. And Brahma was to disseminate the seedlings throughout the universe. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport. It's very interesting. The real creation is therefore called Sarga, and later on the manifestation by Brahma is called Visarga. Okay, verse 8. Thus engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Brahma entered into the well of the lotus, and as it spread all over the universe, he divided it into 3 divisions of worlds, and later into 14 divisions of worlds. Okay, so there is no purport here. Let us go on to verse 9. Lord Brahma is the most exalted personality in the universe because of his causeless devotional service unto the Lord in mature transcendental knowledge. He therefore created all the 14 planetary divisions for inhabitation by the different types of living entities. Okay. So, there's a somewhat more substantial purport here. So Prabhupada begins by saying that the Lord is the reservoir of all the qualities of the living entities. And of course we know he's the reservoir of everything, but including the qualities of the living entities. And when the living entities are conditioned in the material world, then the conditioned souls, they reflect only part of those qualities. And therefore they're sometimes called pratibimbas. So the pratibimbas, these pratibimba living entities, as part and parcel of the Lord, have inherited different proportions of his qualities. And in those terms appear in different species and planets. So, okay. Lord Brahma, so anyway, Prabhupada goes on. Brahma is the creator of the 3 worlds, which is the lower planets called Patala Lokas, then the middle planets called the Bhua Lokas, and then the upper planets called the Swar Lokas. Okay, so Brahma is the creator of the 3 worlds, but there are still higher worlds: Mahaloka, Tapaloka, Satyaloka, Brahmaloka, and these are not destroyed at the times of devastation, depending on which devastation that is, at least. And why is this? This is because of the pure devotional service of the inhabitants, whose existence goes on to the end of Dviparartha time, when they're generally liberated from the chain of birth and death in the material world. Okay, so now we go into the 4th section, which is verse 10, only verse 10. And we've called this Vidura Asks for a description of time. Yes, so it's only the 1 verse, and it's very specific, so we've put it in its own section. Okay, so we just read through it, of course. Verse 10. Vidura inquired from Maitreya, O my Lord, O greatly learned sage, kindly describe eternal time, which is another form of the Supreme Lord, the wonderful actor. What are the symptoms of that eternal time? Please describe them to us in detail. Right, okay. So, Srila Prabhupada Prabhupada begins the purport by explaining that the universe, it's a manifestation of all different sorts of entities, beginning with the atoms, and it's all under the control of the Lord in his form of Kala, in his form of Kala or eternal time. So, what Prabhupada calls the controlling time has different dimensions in relation to particular physical embodiments. Okay, so there are different times. Yeah, and Prabhupada now lists out, looks like 5 times. So there's a time for atomic dissolution and a time for the universal dissolution. So those are 2 more or less particular physical embodiments. Atomic time, atomic dissolution and universal dissolution. Then third is, there's a time for the annihilation of the body of the human being. And then there's a time for the annihilation of the universal body. And fifth point, there's also a time, there's also growth, development, and the resultant actions in this world. They all depend on the time factor. So, Prabhupada concludes the purport. Vidura wanted to know in detail the different physical manifestations and their times of annihilation. All right, so we go on to the 5th section, from verse 11 to verse 17, and we've titled this, Maitreya. Maitreya discusses time in terms of phases of creation. Maitreya discusses time in terms of in terms of phases of creation, verse 11 to verse 17. So we'll read through the verses as we normally do. So first of all, verse 11. Maitreya said, eternal time is the primeval source of the interactions of the 3 modes of material nature. It is unchangeable and limitless, and it works as the instrument of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for his pastimes in the material creation. All right, now verse 12. This cosmic so this is Maitreya, of course. Maitreya saying that the cosmic manifestation is separated from the Supreme Lord as material energy by means of Kala. Kala means time, which is the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Lord. It is situated as the objective manifestation of the Lord under the influence of the same material energy of Vishnu. Interesting, very interesting. Okay. Verse 13. The cosmic manifestation as it is now, or the cosmic manifestation is as it is now. It was the same in the past, and it will continue in the same way in the future. Verse 14. There are 9 different kinds of creations, besides the one which naturally occurs due to the interactions of the modes. There are 3 kinds of annihilations due to eternal time, the material elements, and the quality of one's work. Verse 15. Of the 9 creations, the first one is the creation of the Mahatattva, or the sum total of the material ingredients, wherein the modes interact due to the presence of the Supreme Lord. In the second, the false ego is generated, in which the material ingredients, material knowledge, and material activities arise. Okay, verse 16. The sense perceptions are created in the third creation, and from these the elements are generated. The fourth creation is the creation of knowledge and of the working capacity. The fifth, okay, now on to verse 17. The fifth creation is that of the controlling deities by the interaction of the mode of goodness, of which the mind is the sum total. The sixth creation is the ignorant darkness of the living entity, by which the master acts as a fool. That's interesting, isn't it? What does that mean? The master acts as a fool. Anyway, okay, let's find out. So, right, let's go through in detail. Section 5. Maitreya discusses time in terms of phases of creation. And it's verse 11 to verse 17. Maitreya said, eternal time is the primeval source of the interactions of the 3 modes of material nature. It is unchangeable and limitless, and it works as the instrument of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for his pastimes in the material creation. Okay. So, yeah, there's a more substantial purport here. Let's have a look at it. So, Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, the impersonal time factor is the background of the material manifestation as the instrument of the Supreme Lord. So it is the ingredient of assistance offered to material nature. You may have some assistance may be given in a certain situation, but what's it made up of? That is the ingredient of assistance offered, in this case to material nature. So nobody knows when it began or when it ends, the material nature, the material creation. So it is, but it is time only which has a record. It can keep a record of the creation, maintenance, and destruction of the material world. So time, it's really a big thing, time. Time is the material cause of creation, and therefore it is a self-expansion of the personality of Godhead. And therefore time, kala, time, is considered the impersonal feature of the Lord. So on to the second paragraph, which explains that modern people explain time in different ways. Some almost as the Bhagavatam does. For example, Hebrew literature is accepted. Well, in Hebrew literature, time is accepted as is almost the same as Srimad Bhagavatam. So they say, the Jewish people say, God, who at sundry times means different times, God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake or spoke in time past unto the fathers by the prophets. Okay, we're not here to really study the Judaic religion, but that's interesting. It's an interesting point. So, but anyway, to continue on, metaphysically, time is taken as absolute and real. Absolute time is continuous and unaffected by the speed or slowness of material things. I mean, this is pretty esoteric. Prabhupada says, time is astronomically and mathematically calculated in relation to the speed, change, and life of a particular object. That was Srila Prabhupada there. But then Prabhupada goes on that time, in fact, time has nothing to do with the relativities of things. Everything is shaped and calculated, although everything is shaped and calculated in terms of the facility offered by time. Facilities offered by time. So time is the basic measurement of activity of our senses by which we calculate past, present, and future. But in factual calculation, time has no beginning or end. And time, this is a whole subject. It's a very deep subject. But here's a very important statement from Chanakya Pandit. He says that a tiny bit of time, a slight fraction of time, cannot be purchased for millions of dollars. So therefore, if we waste a moment, just that, then it's the greatest loss in life. Chanakya Pandit says, yeah. So time is not, Prabhupada says, time is not subject to any form of psychology. And nor are the moments objective realities in themselves, but they are dependent on particular experiences. I mean, this is all pretty esoteric. Anyway, okay. So, Prabhupada says, Srila Jiva Goswami concludes that the time factor is intermixed with the activities, the actions and reactions of the external energy, of the material energy, Maya. So that external energy works under time, under the superintendence of time, as the Lord himself does. And that is why material nature has produced, or appears to have produced, so many wonderful things. And Prabhupada says, Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 10 confirms this conclusion. Mayajikshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetu nanena konteya jagad viparivartate. That, and this is a famous verse, and Prabhupada has already quoted it on a fair number of occasions, and he will quote it more as we move on too. But it basically means that the material nature, Prabhupada's saying, Krishna is saying, the material nature is working under my supervision and creating all moving and non-moving beings. Right. Okay, so on to verse 12. The cosmic manifestation is separated from the Supreme Lord as material energy by means of kala, or time, which is the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Supreme. It is situated as the objective manifestation of the Lord under the influence of the same material energy of the Lord, of Vishnu. Okay. So we have a shortish purport here. Prabhupada says that as Narada previously told Vyasadeva, back in the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, this world, this manifested world, is a form of the personality of Godhead. But it appears to be something else, beyond or besides or different from the Lord. And so how is that? Here comes the explanation. This is because of this world being separated from the Lord by kala, by time. And Prabhupada gives an example. It's a very good example. It is something like, Prabhupada says, something like the tape-recorded voice of a person who is now separated, or which is now separated from the speaker. Yes. The tape-recorded voice of a person who is now separated from the voice. So just as the tape recording is now on the tape, so the whole cosmic manifestation is situated on the material energy and appears separate by means of kala, or time. So, okay, then Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the material manifestation is therefore the objective manifestation of the Supreme Lord and exhibits his impersonal feature so much adored by impersonalist philosophers. Wow, it's deep, but it's understandable. Verse 13. This cosmic manifestation is as it is now. It was the same in the past, and it will continue in the same way in the future. Srila Prabhupada makes a point. There is a schedule, systematic schedule. Well, all schedules generally are systematic. There's a schedule for the creation maintenance and annihilation of the material world. There's a schedule there. As Bhagavad Gita chapter 9 verse 8 says, if you want to check that verse, you can have a look in Bhagavad Gita. So as it is created now and will be destroyed later, so also it existed before that, in the past. And again, in the future, it will be created, maintained, and destroyed in time. Yes. So this is all very deep and quite amazing, actually. Therefore, the activities of the time factor are perpetual and eternal and cannot be said to be false. Rather than being false, the activities of time are temporary and occasional. But not false, as the Mayavadis say. So let's have a look here. Anyway, let's do verse 14. There are 9 different kinds of creations besides the one which naturally occurs due to the interactions of the modes. There are 3 kinds of annihilations due to eternal time, the material elements, and the quality of one's work. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada gives short purport here. What we just read about, the scheduled creations and annihilations, they take place by the Supreme Will, in terms of the Supreme Will of the Lord. But there are other creations due to interactions of the material elements. They take place by the intelligence of Brahma. And this will be explained further on. Yeah. So, but at present, the only preliminary information is given in terms of 3 kinds of annihilations. It's mentioned there in the verse, 3 kinds of annihilations. Annihilations are 1, due to the scheduled time of the annihilation of the entire universe. 2, due to a fire which emanates from the mouth of Ananta. And 3, due to one's qualitative actions and reactions. So we won't go into this now, but we will go into it later. And let's just, where are we here? Let's see if we can finish this section. Oh no, we can't. Anyway, let's just finish here, actually. Let's finish here. We'll carry on tomorrow with verse 15. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.